My name is Amelia, and before I tell you everything, I need you to hold on to this opening moment, because it still burns in my memory. 3 days before Christmas, while the city outside shimmered with lights and soft carols drifted through the frozen air, my phone rang. I had just kicked off my hospital clogs, shrugged out of my heavy winter coat, and let a tired smile rest on my face. In the corner sat my suitcase, packed days in advance, with a forest green sweater draped neatly on top. Wrapped gifts stacked beside it, like promises waiting to be delivered. I had baked apple cinnamon bread pudding that morning, the one everyone in my family devoured every year, though they never seemed to remember who made it. I had tried. I had always tried. The screen lit up with Ethan's name, my younger brother. I thought it would be the usual holiday logistics rides, napkins, or some last-minute shopping list. I answered with warmth still in my voice, but his tone was different, rehearsed, almost casual. Hey, Amelia. So listen, Celeste is coming this year. She's really sensitive to, energies. With your work at the hospital, things can feel kind of heavy. For her sake, maybe it's better if you sit this one out. It's nothing personal. Nothing personal? I froze, staring at the blinking lights of my small Christmas tree. My hands tightened on the phone, but my voice stayed calm. Okay, one word dry as ash on my tongue. An hour later, my mother called. Her voice was syrup sweet, wrapping barbed wire in silk. Honey, we're just trying to make things easy for everyone. You know how Celeste is. If you come, it might cause confusion. Honestly, if you show up, we might not even answer the door. And that was it. No regret, no hesitation. Not just not wanted, but unwelcome. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't beg for a place at the table where I had never truly belonged. Instead, I hung up. My eyes drifted toward the carefully wrapped gifts by the door. Gifts that would never be opened. I felt like I was packing up after an invisible funeral. For years I had believed that love meant sacrifice. That if I worked hard enough, gave enough, stayed reliable enough, eventually they would see me. I thought being dependable would earn me a permanent seat at the table. But in that quiet apartment, with the hum of the radiator and the lingering scent of cinnamon, I realized the truth. I had never been invited to belong. I had only been tolerated until my presence became inconvenient. Snow began to fall outside, soft, relentless, a blanket of silence. And inside something shifted. No more trying. No more shrinking myself to fit into spaces they offered. No more pretending. This Christmas, I would not be the one standing outside with my heart in my hand begging to be let in. And for the first time in my life, I understood something that shook me more than the rejection itself. I didn't have to be. That phone call wasn't just about Christmas. It was a mirror. A brutal reminder of years of favoritism, dismissal, and erasure. But it was also the spark that lit the fuse. Because once the line is crossed, once the eviction is made clear, there is no going back to the illusion. This was no longer just another holiday slight. This was the moment I chose myself. The night after those phone calls, I sat in my kitchen, with the lights dimmed low. The gifts remained stacked in the corner, their bright paper looking almost mocking now. For a long while, I did nothing but listen to the sound of the radiator humming. Then, something inside me hardened. If they could shut the door on me without hesitation, then I could shut off the endless stream of sacrifices that had kept them afloat for years. I pulled my laptop close and logged into my banking app. My hands didn't tremble, though my heart was racing. I clicked on the mortgage top-up I had been quietly paying for my parents' house. Canceled. I opened the emergency maintenance fund that I had kept active for surprise repairs. Locked. The automatic car loan assistance for Ethan's endless bad luck with vehicles. Terminated. Click by click, I dismantled the invisible scaffolding that had propped them up. Not in anger, not in revenge, but in clarity. Each decision felt like placing one brick of a wall that should have been built years ago. For the first time, I wasn't pouring myself into a bottomless pit of obligations. I was reclaiming my own life. The strangest thing was how calm it felt, almost mechanical at first, as if I were performing a routine chore. Yet with every cancellation, a lightness grew inside me. The weight I had carried unseen, unacknowledged began to lift. For years I had convinced myself that family loyalty meant bleeding silently. Now I finally understood. Real loyalty is not servitude. I sat back staring at the list of accounts I had closed off. Mortgage, maintenance, loans, plane tickets, medical bills. My name had been written in invisible ink across every crisis, every emergency, every disaster that had threatened them. And they had never once thanked me, never once recognized it. Gratitude was foreign to them. They took because they believed it was owed. But that night I realized something powerful. They had never asked me to stop. I had to be the one to decide, and I had. This is where I need to pause and say something directly to you. If you've ever felt like the invisible scaffolding in your own family holding up walls that would crumble without your effort, then you know this weight, and I want to tell you, you are not alone. Before I go further, tell me in the comments, have you ever been the one carrying everyone else's burdens while no one carried yours? I want to hear your story. And if you're finding power in mine, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, because it only gets more intense from here. After shutting down the financial lifelines, I brewed myself a cup of tea. The snow outside had thickened, falling in quiet sheets that blurred the streetlights into glowing halos. I held the mug between my hands, letting the steam rise into my face, and I thought about the years I had spent believing that this was what family meant. It was not. Family should not be a ledger, love should not be a transaction, and belonging should never be conditional on how much you can give or how small you can make yourself to fit someone else's comfort. I leaned back in my chair and allowed the silence to settle in. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of the truth I had ignored for too long. That night I made a choice that would change everything. No more rescues, no more quiet deposits, no more being the safety net stretched thin. If they wanted to erase me from Christmas, then they would also have to live without the invisible hand that had always shielded them from consequences. I closed my eyes, letting the stillness sink deeper into me. And for the first time in years, I felt steady, unshaken, whole. Because I had stopped begging for love that should have been mine without question. Because I had finally said no without ever needing to speak the word. Growing up, I never understood why the same roof could feel like two different worlds. On one side was Ethan, the golden boy, the miracle child. On the other was me, Amelia, the firstborn, the trial run, the one who carried all the weight of expectations, but never the glow of celebration. I remember being 10 years old when Ethan took a black permanent marker to the living room wall. His wild loops and swirls covered the beige paint like vines spreading across a garden. My parents laughed. They called it expressive, a sign of his creativity. They took photos, framed the memory as if it were art. 2 days later, I dropped a bowl while setting the dinner table. The crash echoed through the kitchen, my parents' faces twisted into disappointment, careless, too distracted, too serious. That was the script written for me. Ethan was quirky, I was flawed. The pattern only grew sharper as the years went on. Report cards came home, mine, filled with straight A's. They were tucked into a drawer without a word. Ethan's participation ribbon from a school art contest that hung on the fridge for weeks. Guests who visited our home saw his ribbon shining in plain view, while my achievements disappeared into silence. The double standard was impossible to ignore. Yet as a child, I tried to swallow it to convince myself that maybe they loved me in quieter ways. But quiet can feel like absence. Quiet can feel like being unseen. By high school, the gap had become a canyon. I spent hours studying late into the night, fueled by the hope that perfect grades might finally win their attention. Ethan drifted through classes, his teachers sending notes home about skipped assignments and daydreaming. But when he failed, they called him misunderstood. When I succeeded, they called me driven, as if it were a flaw to be managed, not a gift to be celebrated. I carried that imbalance like a shadow. It clung to me in every interaction, every dinner table conversation, every birthday party where Ethan's wishes became the centerpiece, while mine felt like an afterthought. One year, my father joked at a family barbecue that I had been their trial run. He laughed while handing Ethan the bigger slice of cake. Everyone else laughed too. I forced a smile, but inside something cracked. It was more than a joke, it was the truth they all believed. Ethan was the answered prayer. I was just the practice round. Looking back now, I see how that childhood shaped everything that followed. It taught me to perform, to overachieve, to become useful in ways that might finally earn me a sliver of affection. But affection given as a reward is not love, and I wish I had learned that sooner. Instead, I internalized their script. Ethan was the star, I was the scaffolding. He was celebrated for potential while I was punished even in achievement. And the cruelest part, I thought it was normal. I thought every family worked this way. But sitting in my apartment that Christmas years later, I realized the roots of rejection had been growing for decades. Being banned from the holiday wasn't a sudden betrayal, it was simply the final confirmation of a story that had been written long ago. A story where I was always too much, too serious, too invisible. I know many of you listening might recognize parts of this story. The way one sibling becomes the golden child, while the other becomes the forgotten one. The way families can assign roles so young that you grow up wearing them like chains. And if you've lived that, you know the scars it leaves. Because when you are cast as invisible long enough, you start to believe it yourself. And that belief, more than the silence, more than the neglect, is what wounds the deepest. But here's the truth I wish someone had told me back then: roles can be rewritten. The script isn't permanent. You are not the trial run. You are not disposable. And sometimes it takes being locked out of a Christmas celebration to finally understand that. Sorry. That night, as I thought about Ethan being praised for every misstep while my milestones dissolved into nothing, I felt something shift inside me. Not bitterness, not even sadness. Clarity. And clarity is far more powerful than approval. When I received my acceptance letter into medical school, I thought it would finally change everything. The envelope felt heavy in my hands, like a trophy I had earned through endless nights of studying, sleepless shifts at the clinic, and years of proving myself worthy. The University of North Carolina School of Medicine first round, no wait list. It was everything I had worked for, everything I thought my parents would finally celebrate. I walked into the kitchen that day, clutching the letter, my smile stretching so wide it almost hurt. My mother glanced at the paper, skimmed the words, and offered a faint smile. "That's intense, honey. You'll have to be careful not to burn out." Then she turned back to stir the pot on the stove, as if I had just told her the weather forecast. My heart dropped into silence. Not a hug, not a celebration, not even a word to mark the milestone, just a warning: be careful not to burn out. 2 weeks later, Ethan dropped out of college for the third time. He announced it casually, declaring that he was chasing his dream of becoming a creative director. My parents threw him a re-entry party complete with balloons, cake, and framed photos of him holding a paintbrush. They called it courage. They called it vision. They toasted his resilience. His failures were parades. My success was a footnote. I still remember standing at that party, watching them beam with pride, while Ethan laughed with friends' gifts piled around him. And all I could think was, what did I have to do to be worthy of even a fraction of that pride? It didn't stop there. When I showed them sketches I had drawn during medical rotations, small fragments of sunsets and portraits scratched between shifts, they tossed them into the recycling bin. We thought it was scrap paper, they said, laughing. But Ethan's every doodle was preserved like gold, framed on the wall, as proof of his creativity. When I graduated with honors, the ceremony came and went with barely a nod. But when Ethan managed to land a short-term gig on a photography project, my parents bragged to every neighbor about his talent. His framed photo still hangs in their hallway like a shrine. Mine, nothing. The contrast was sharp enough to wound, but I kept convincing myself it was temporary, that maybe eventually they would see me, that maybe I only needed to give a little more push, a little harder, sacrifice a little deeper. I didn't realize then that some people are addicted to the narrative they've built. To them, Ethan would always be the golden boy, and I would always be the serious, invisible daughter who kept everything running. Looking back now, I can see how every dismissal shaped me. It taught me to swallow pain quietly, to keep showing up even when no one noticed, to prove myself over and over without expecting applause. But here's the dangerous part. When you get used to being overlooked, you start to overlook yourself. You begin to believe that love must be earned, that milestones only matter if someone else validates them. And that lie can bury you. That is why the night they banned me from Christmas wasn't really about Celeste. It was about decades of conditioning that told me I didn't deserve a seat at the table. And that night, for the first time, I chose to break the cycle. If you're watching this and you've ever had your achievements ignored while someone else's mistakes were glorified, I want you to hear me clearly. It's not you. Their blindness does not define your worth. You are not invisible. The truth is simple but hard to accept. Sometimes the people you love the most will never see you clearly. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop waiting for them to. I thought about all those moments. My acceptance letter dismissed Ethan's dropout, celebrated as I sat in my apartment that December. Snow still falling outside my bank accounts, freshly untangled from theirs. I realized the truth. Recognition from them was never coming. And maybe I didn't need it anymore. Because my life had been built on something sturdier than applause. And this time I wasn't going to let their silence define me. There is a word I used to describe myself in those years, though I never said it out loud. Scaffolding. The invisible beams that hold everything up but are never meant to be noticed. That was me and my family. When the insurance company refused to cover the leaking roof on my parents' house, I quietly paid the contractor myself. When my mother's physical therapy bills stacked higher than they could manage, I called the clinic, negotiated the payments, and covered the balance. When my father's truck broke down, I wired the money for the repairs before he even asked. And Ethan. His freelance photography gigs were unpredictable. His rent ran short, his bank account dipped, and somehow he always had a soft landing. I slipped deposits into his account under the radar. He would hug me briefly, call me the best sister ever, and within a week, it was as if the help had never happened. Forgotten. Erased. I didn't keep track of the money, but the numbers were enormous over time. Plane tickets, car batteries, medical bills, tuition top-ups. Groceries slipped into their hands like second nature. It wasn't generosity anymore, it was obligation, not because they asked. Because I had trained them to believe I would always show up. Gratitude, it was never spoken. In their language, thanks was assumed like air. They didn't even think to acknowledge it. And I told myself that was love. But scaffolding isn't meant to bleed for the building it supports. It isn't meant to be crushed while everyone else lives comfortably inside. I didn't see that then. I only saw a family I desperately wanted to belong to. And so I worked harder. I became the reliable one, the problem solver, the patch that covered every crack. I answered every call, stayed late at the hospital, and still rushed home to pick up their emergencies. I convinced myself that being indispensable was the only way to matter, until that December night when the phone calls came, when they told me not to come to Christmas because my presence was too heavy. In that moment, I realized the scaffolding had been carrying a house that never wanted me inside. I need to pause here and ask you something. Have you ever been the one who held everything together for everyone else, financially, emotionally, practically, only to realize that no one noticed until you stopped? Leave me a comment. I truly want to hear your stories because this isn't just mine, it's ours. So, the thing about being scaffolding is that your absence is louder than your presence. No one sees you while you hold the weight. But when you step back, when the roof caves, when the bills pile up, suddenly the silence roars. That's exactly what happened after I shut down every account. At first it was quiet, too quiet, no frantic calls, no crises to solve. But deep down I knew it was only a matter of time. They would feel the missing beam. And when they did, it would not be my burden to fix anymore. Looking back, I see how dangerous it is to let love become a transaction, to let usefulness replace worth. It cost me years of my life, years of exhaustion, years of shrinking myself into a role that should never have been mine. But that Christmas, as the snow fell steady outside my window, I promised myself I would not return to being scaffolding. I would not keep propping up walls that refused to shelter me. Because real love doesn't demand you break yourself to keep others standing. Real love builds with you, not on you. And if you're listening to this, maybe it's time to ask yourself, are you scaffolding too? That night, I unplugged the Christmas tree, folded the blanket tighter around my shoulders, and looked at the gifts I had bought. They no longer looked like promises. They looked like evidence, proof that I had tried, proof that I had given, proof that I had loved the best way I knew how. But evidence of love does not obligate me to remain invisible. For the first time, I felt the stirrings of freedom. For most of my life, I carried a single belief like a stone in my pocket, heavy, cold, unquestioned. The belief was simple: if I gave enough, I would finally be loved. If I stayed useful, dependable, and selfless, they would one day look at me and see more than a shadow. I thought love was something you could earn through sacrifice. Every time I transferred money into Ethan's account, I told myself it was proof of loyalty. Every bill I paid, every holiday I carried on my shoulders, every quiet rescue became a line in a ledger I believed would eventually balance. One day they would repay me not in dollars, but in acceptance. But that day never came. I see it now for what it was: a bargain with no return. I had mistaken survival strategies for love. I thought showing up no matter the cost would make me indispensable. I thought indispensability meant belonging. But belonging that is bought is not real. It is servitude, wrapped in the illusion of family. And the cruelest part, I wore the chains willingly. I told myself I didn't need praise, that being the reliable one was enough, that love didn't have to be loud, it could be quiet, invisible, transactional. As long as they kept me around, I told myself it was proof I mattered. But when that phone call came 3 days before Christmas, their message was clear. Even endless sacrifice could not buy me a place at the table. Even my reliability had an expiration date. My usefulness was welcome, my presence was not. That truth shattered the belief I had carried for decades. So, I remember sitting by the frosted window that night, watching the snow thicken outside. Streetlights blurred into halos, the world wrapped in white silence. Inside, I felt the weight of every sacrifice I had made, not as pride, but as grief. Grief for the years I had spent bargaining for love that was never real. It was then I realized something profound. Love that demands silence is not love. Family that only values your usefulness is not family. That realization stung at first. It burned. But slowly the burn gave way to clarity. And clarity is stronger than pain. The truth is, I had confused obligation with devotion. They leaned on me not because they cherished me, but because I was convenient. They accepted my sacrifices not because they valued me, but because I made their lives easier. That is not love. That is consumption. If you're watching this and you've ever believed that giving more would finally win you a seat at the table, I need you to hear this: love should never be a transaction. If someone only sees you when you bleed for them, then they do not truly see you at all. I wish I had learned that earlier. I wish someone had told me that real love celebrates you simply for existing, not for what you can provide. But maybe that's why I had to learn it this way, because once you see the truth, you cannot unsee it. And once you stop bargaining, you begin to reclaim yourself. That night, as I closed my banking app and stared at the untouched gifts in the corner, I let the realization sink deep into me. I didn't need to earn their love. I didn't need to prove my worth. I had been worthy all along, and their blindness was not my fault. For the first time in years, I stopped trying to buy a place I should have had without question. And in that decision, I found a freedom more powerful than any approval they could have given me. Sometimes it takes being pushed out of Christmas to finally understand you were never inside in the first place. And maybe that's where healing begins. Christmas Eve arrived like a ghost, silent and cold. For the first time in my life, I wasn't rushing through crowded airports, balancing trays of food in my arms, or wrapping last-minute gifts in the backseat of a car. I was alone in my tiny apartment, surrounded by evidence of love that would never be received. The Christmas tree stood in the corner unlit. I pulled the plug myself that evening. The ornaments glittered faintly in the dark, but they felt hollow now, like props in a play that had closed years ago. The gifts I had wrapped so carefully mocked me with their bright paper and perfect bows. They weren't promises anymore. They were reminders. Proof that I had tried too hard for too long. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of rosemary and fabric softener. Outside, snow fell steadily, covering the street in white silence. Inside, I breathed deeply, letting the quiet settle in my chest. And here's the truth: I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even feel sadness clawing at my throat. What I felt was stillness. Strange, sacred stillness. The kind that comes after a storm when the air feels scrubbed clean. For the first time in years, I wasn't scrambling to hold everyone else together. I wasn't begging for a seat at a table that had never been mine. I wasn't proving fixing or rescuing. I was simply here, alive, present, uninvited, and strangely free. So, the hours dragged, yet they also slipped by in slow motion. Noon passed without the usual group texts or chaotic background noise of my parents' living room. No selfies of Ethan posing beside the tree. No urgent requests for me to send money because the ham was more expensive than expected. Just silence. And in that silence, I heard something I had never heard before: my own heartbeat, steady and strong. My own voice whispering inside me, "This is what it feels like to stop performing." I realized something important that night. Family gatherings had always been noisy, but the noise had been a disguise. Underneath the laughter and the chatter was a truth I hadn't wanted to see. I had never belonged there. And once I accepted that, the silence no longer felt like exile. It felt like release. As I sat by the frosted window sipping my tea, I thought about all the years I had spent trying to fit into their story. I had mistaken tolerance for love, obligation, for devotion. And now, in the quiet of my apartment, I could finally see it for what it was. And I promise you, this clarity can be louder than celebration. So, before I tell you what happened next, let me stop here and ask you something. Have you ever spent a holiday, a birthday, or a milestone alone, not because you wanted to, but because the people who should have shown up didn't share your story in the comments? And make sure you subscribe, because what came after this silence was louder than any argument I had ever had with them. The real fallout was just beginning. But that night, as snow kept falling outside, I folded the blanket tighter around me. I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't draft holiday greetings. I didn't apologize for my absence. I chose stillness. I chose myself. And I had no idea then how much that choice would ripple. Because sometimes the most powerful move you can make is not to show up. And sometimes that absence speaks louder than presence ever could. Christmas morning arrived soft and gray. The silence outside matched the silence within my walls. No calls, no messages, no chaotic background of my family laughing in their living room. I thought maybe this year would pass quietly, that I would finally have a holiday, free from the weight of pretending. But silence doesn't stay empty for long. Late in the afternoon, my phone buzzed. Once, then again, then 3 times in rapid succession. At first, I ignored it, assuming it was some forgotten group chat. But then a new notification lit the screen: words from Aunt Lillian. "You've done enough damage already." My stomach dropped. Damage. What damage? I hadn't even been there. The phone rang almost immediately, her name flashing on the screen. I answered, my voice hoarse from disuse. What happened? Her tone was careful, like someone approaching a wounded animal. "They're saying you ruined Christmas." I blinked, stunned. My breath caught in my throat. How I wasn't even there. How could absence ruin something I wasn't invited to? Aunt Lillian hesitated, piecing together fragments of the story. At some point during dinner, Celeste, Ethan's girlfriend, the reason I had been excluded, wandered through the house with a glass of wine in her hand. She admired the old family photos lined along the mantel. Then she stopped at one, a faded snapshot of me as a teenager, smiling awkwardly in a sweater too big for my frame. "That's Dr. Amelia," Celeste had said aloud. "She saved my grandmother's life." The room fell silent. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Laughter died in mid-breath. And in that silence, the carefully constructed illusion of me, the too serious, too heavy, too much sister, collapsed. The irony was sharp. I hadn't been allowed through the door, but my ghost had slipped in anyway, carried by Celeste's memory. And that single recognition, me as a doctor, me as someone who had saved a life, was enough to unravel everything my family had whispered about me for years. Celeste had left the party soon after, stiffly thanking my parents, then disappearing into the night. By the time Aunt Lillian called me, the fallout had already begun. Celeste had posted online something honest, something raw, and it was already rippling through the fragile web of connections my family relied on for Ethan's budding art career. I didn't need all the details. I could imagine the scene perfectly. The whispered jokes about me being too intense, the careful cruelty disguised as concern, the way my existence was reduced to a cautionary tale about ambition and loneliness. And now, for the first time, someone else had seen through it. Someone outside the family had recognized the truth. But what struck me most was the absurdity. I had been erased from their holiday, and yet somehow I was still the one accused of breaking it. My absence, it seemed, was more disruptive than my presence ever had been. And in that twisted accusation, I found unexpected clarity. It didn't matter what I did or didn't do. In their eyes, I would always be the problem. They needed me to be the scapegoat because admitting otherwise meant confronting their own cruelty. If you're listening to this, I want you to think about something. Have you ever been blamed for breaking something you weren't even part of? Have you ever carried guilt that didn't belong to you? Leave me a comment because your silence deserves to be broken too. That night, I put down my phone and stared at the untouched gifts in the corner. I didn't feel the need to defend myself. I didn't feel the urge to send a single message back. Because sometimes the loudest truth is not shouted. Sometimes it's simply refusing to carry a weight that was never yours in the first place. I hadn't ruined their Christmas. They had. And now the cracks in their perfect story were spreading faster than they could patch them. The real twist of that Christmas came from someone I barely knew, Celeste. The same woman whose sensitivity to energy had been used as the excuse to push me out. The woman I was told would feel uncomfortable if I attended. What they didn't know, what they could never have predicted, was that Celeste had already met me. Not in a living room filled with decorations and wine glasses, but in a hospital corridor years earlier. Her grandmother had been admitted under my care. Elderly, fragile, kidneys failing. Most doctors had given up hope, but I hadn't. I had stayed by her bedside long after visiting hours, listening to her stories, reminding her she was still living, still valued. I hadn't done it for recognition. I had done it because that was who I was. A doctor who believed dignity mattered as much as treatment. Celeste had never forgotten. So when she saw that faded photograph of me on the mantel, a younger version of myself awkward in an oversized sweater, she recognized me instantly. "That's Dr. Amelia," she said aloud, her voice carrying across the room. "She saved my grandmother's life." The atmosphere shattered. Forks clattered against plates. Laughter strangled into silence. Every word my family had ever spoken about me, their jokes, their dismissals, their careful erasures, suddenly collapsed under the weight of Celeste's truth. I wasn't the heavy one. I wasn't the problem. I wasn't invisible. I was the woman who had saved a life. Wait. According to Aunt Lillian, the room dissolved into awkward glances and mumbled half-truths. My parents stumbled over explanations. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his carefully curated image of being the star now under threat. And Celeste, sharp, perceptive Celeste, quietly gathered her coat, thanked my parents stiffly, and walked out without another word. By the next morning, her online post was circulating. Honest. Raw. She didn't name names, but she didn't have to. People in their art circle knew exactly who she was talking about. The family narrative they had built Ethan as the golden boy, me as the difficult sister, was crumbling. So, I sat alone in my apartment reading Aunt Lillian's hesitant recount of the night. And though part of me wanted to laugh at the irony, another part of me simply felt still. For years I had been shouting into a void, trying to make them see me, and in the end it wasn't my words that did it. It was someone else's memory. Celeste had seen me, not through the lens of resentment, not through the filter of family politics, but through a moment of humanity where kindness had mattered more than appearance. And that single recognition had done what decades of my effort never could. It had shifted the balance of truth. But if you're listening to this right now, I want you to think about the people who have truly seen you. Who was the person that recognized your worth when others ignored it? drop their name or their story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe because the fallout from Celeste's revelation was just the beginning. The lengths my family went to protect their image will shock you. That night I sat by the window again, tea cooling in my hands, the snow falling harder outside. And for the first time, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel erased. Because sometimes it only takes one person, one witness to unravel years of lies. And in that unraveling, I found the faintest outline of freedom. The morning after Christmas, I woke to an email notification blinking on my phone. At first, I thought it was work-related, something from the hospital, maybe a schedule update. But as soon as I opened it, my chest tightened. It wasn't from my department. It was from my family. Signed by 3 names together, my mother, my father, and Ethan. A united front typed neatly in black and white. The subject line read, "Let's reset things." I should have felt relief. After all, wasn't this what I had always wanted? A gesture that sounded like reconciliation. But as I read the carefully polished words, a different truth sank in. They weren't apologizing, not really. They were reframing. Paragraphs about heightened emotions and holiday misunderstandings. Lines about valuing family and wanting harmony. The language was smooth, deliberate, rehearsed words that said everything and meant nothing. And then buried halfway down the 4th paragraph was the real reason for their sudden olive branch. They wanted me to reach out to Celeste, to smooth things over, to protect Ethan's reputation in the art circles she was connected to in New York. It wasn't about me. It had never been about me. They didn't suddenly realize they had mistreated me. They realized their image was cracking, and they needed me to plaster it back together. I read the email again slower this time, letting each hollow word sink in. There was no mention of the Christmas ban, no recognition of the years of sacrifice I had made, no acknowledgement of the imbalance that had shaped my entire life. Just one request: fix it for us. Fix it, Amelia, like you always do. But I didn't reply. Because for the first time I understood something vital. Silence could be an answer. Later that afternoon, I walked through my apartment with the email still open on my phone. My eyes drifted to the wrapped gifts stacked neatly in the closet, bright paper, careful bows. They no longer looked like offerings to a family. They looked like evidence that I had loved them in the best way I knew how, even when they refused to see me. And yet they still wanted more. They always would. If you're hearing this, I want you to pay attention. When people reach out only after their comfort is threatened, not after your pain is acknowledged, do not mistake it for love. It is strategy. I had spent years believing their half gestures were attempts at connection. But now I saw them clearly. They weren't seeking to mend the fracture. They were scrambling to protect their reflection. And I was done polishing mirrors for people who refused to see me. The silence between us stretched longer than it ever had before. They sent another email 2 days later, shorter, sharper. My phone buzzed with Ethan's texts, then my mother's voicemails, each one laced with urgency but still void of accountability. And with every ignored message, I felt stronger. 'Cause sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to play the part they've written for you. That night I sat at my desk rereading the email one final time. Then I archived it. Not deleted, archived. A reminder that words without truth are just noise. I brewed another cup of tea, wrapped myself in my blanket, and stared at the snow swirling outside my window. And as the city lights blurred into halos, I realized I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel anger. I felt peace. Peace that came from finally understanding that their version of love had always been conditional, and I no longer accepted the terms. When the emails didn't pull me back, they changed tactics. Manipulation was the only language my family truly spoke, and this time they aimed straight at my reputation. It started with a phone call from the hospital administrator, a man I had only met once at a charity gala. His voice was awkward, hesitant. "Dr. Amelia, I just wanted to check in. Your father contacted me. He expressed concerns about your emotional stability. Suggested you might be struggling. He thought maybe you should take some time off." My chest turned to ice. My father, the same man who had once joked that I was too serious for my own good, was now weaponizing that seriousness against me. Not because he believed it, but because he thought it would scare me into compliance. For a moment, my throat closed with rage. But it wasn't the kind of rage that explodes. It was the cold, crystalline kind that sharpens you. Thankfully, the administrator saw through it. He told me he wasn't concerned, that he knew my record, and professionalism spoke for themselves. But the damage was clear. My family wasn't trying to reconcile. They were trying to discredit me. When that failed, they escalated again. Group texts began circulating among extended relatives. Carefully curated half-truths written in the language of concern. Amelia is overwhelmed. Amelia is going through something right now. Amelia just needs space. No mention of the fact that they had banned me from Christmas. No mention of the years of sacrifices I had shouldered. Just whispers designed to erode trust before I could even open my mouth. One cousin I hadn't heard from in 5 years messaged me out of the blue. "Hey, I have a voucher for a yoga retreat if you need a reset," with a smiling emoji at the end, as if my entire life had been reduced to stress management. Overwhelmed, that wasn't the word. Awake was. Each attempt at manipulation only clarified the truth. They weren't fighting for me. They were fighting for the image they had spent decades constructing Ethan as the brilliant artist, my parents as the doting supporters, and me, the quiet sister in the background, who never made waves. And when I stepped out of that role, they didn't know what to do. So they tried to silence me by making me small again. But I want you to sit with this for a moment. Have you ever noticed how quickly people will twist the story when you stop playing your part? They will call you unstable, bitter, selfish anything to drag you back into the script that serves them. It's not about truth, it's about control. And that realization, as painful as it was, gave me strength. Because once you see manipulation for what it is, it loses its grip. I began documenting everything. Screenshots of texts, copies of emails, notes of phone calls. Not because I planned to fight them with their own weapons, but because I needed to remind myself that none of this was imagined, that the gaslighting was real, that the cruelty wasn't just family dynamics. It was strategy. And as their voices grew louder in group chats and whispered messages, mine grew steadier in silence. 'Cause the truth doesn't need shouting. It only needs to be lived. Late one evening, I sat by the window again, the city blanketed in snow. I thought about the absurdity of it all, how they had gone from excluding me to smearing me in the span of days. And I realized something powerful. If people have to destroy your reputation to keep their story intact, then your existence alone is proof of their lies. And that strangely was liberating. I wasn't the unstable one. I wasn't the problem. I was the mirror they couldn't bear to face. And for once, I wasn't going to apologize for holding it up. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when the next move came. The kind of winter day where the cold pressed against the windows like a living thing. I was sitting at my desk filing patient notes, a mug of lukewarm tea forgotten beside me when I heard a soft, tentative knock at the door. For a moment I thought I imagined it, but then came another knock, firmer this time. I rose slowly, my heartbeat steady, not frantic. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. And there they were, my mother, my father, and Ethan, bundled in coats, faces drawn tight, smiles stretched too wide, too fragile. A family portrait painted in desperation. I didn't open the door right away. I just stood there watching them through the glass. And in that pause, I realized something crucial. I didn't feel fear, not anger, just a detached sadness. The kind you feel when you finally recognize the rescue ship you've been waiting for is only another mirage. When I finally cracked the door open, the cold air rushed in. My mother spoke first, her voice carefully calibrated to sound gentle. "We just want to talk," she said, clutching her purse like it was a lifeline. I didn't nod. I didn't soften. Because I finally understood they weren't here for me. They were here for the version of me who still believed love could be bartered. The girl who folded herself smaller and smaller to fit the narrow space they allowed. That girl no longer lived here. The silence stretched. My father's jaw tightened. Ethan shifted uncomfortably like he'd rather be anywhere else. And in that tension, I found my strength. I said the only word I needed. No. Not shouted, not dramatic, just steady, clear, final. My mother's face crumpled, part confusion, part offense. as if she couldn't believe the reliable scaffolding she had leaned on for so long had finally stepped away. I closed the door quietly, not slamming, not theatrics, just closed. On the other side, their muffled voices rose, pleading, then frustrated, but I didn't listen. I walked back to my desk, sat down, and wrapped my hands around my cold tea. The silence inside was louder than their knocks. And in that silence, I realized something forgiveness doesn't always mean reopening the door. Sometimes it means keeping it closed. Across the desk sat the framed letter from Celeste. The ink smudged slightly at the corners where she had pressed too hard while writing. I looked at it and felt something I hadn't felt in years, lightness. For once, I wasn't weighed down by the ache of trying to earn their approval. 'Cause even if my family refused to see me, someone had. Celeste had. And that was enough. Big. Before I tell you what happened next, let me leave you with this. What would you have done if the people who erased you suddenly showed up at your door, asking for access they had never given you? Would you open it, or would you finally say no? Share your thoughts in the comments, because this is where the story takes a turn you won't want to miss. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. The next chapter will make everything so much clearer. I heard their footsteps retreat eventually, the thud of car doors, the low growl of the engine starting. They were gone. And for the first time, I didn't feel an urge to run after them. Instead, I felt peace. A quiet, resonant peace that comes only when you finally understand that saying no isn't cruelty, it's clarity. After the sound of their car faded into the distance, the apartment felt impossibly quiet. I sat at my desk, my hands wrapped around the mug of tea that had long since gone cold. Across from me, in a simple frame, was the letter from Celeste. The edges of the paper curled slightly, and the ink smudged at the corners where she had pressed too hard with her pen. But her words, were steady, powerful, undeniable. You made a difference. You didn't give up. You made her feel like she mattered. Her grandmother, a woman, the world had quietly started to dismiss as too old, too fragile, too forgotten, had found dignity in those small moments at the hospital. And Celeste had remembered, not the charts, not the diagnoses, but the presence, the humanity. I traced the ridges of the frame with my fingers, letting the truth sink deeper into me. For years, I had been told that my seriousness was a flaw, that my dedication made me heavy, that my ambition made me unlovable. But here in these words was proof that the very qualities my family mocked were the same ones that had saved a life. It was the recognition I had been starving for, not from my family, but from the universe itself. From someone who saw me clearly, without distortion, without resentment. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. I had never needed their approval. What I needed was to be seen. The letter became more than ink on a page. It became a mirror. For the first time in my life, I looked at myself without the weight of their dismissal clouding my vision. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't too much. I wasn't a burden. I was exactly who I was meant to be. And I had proof. For so long, I had tried to buy my way into belonging. I had believed that if I cared enough, paid enough, gave enough, maybe they would finally see me. But Celeste's words showed me what was true all along. My worth was never meant to be negotiated. It existed, whole, independent, untouched by their blindness. And maybe, just maybe, I didn't need a seat at their table to feel full anymore. That night I hung the letter above my desk where the morning light would catch it. A small, quiet testament to the truth I had almost forgotten. Every time I glanced at it, I felt a steadying anchor in my chest. Proof that even when the people closest to you refuse to see your worth, someone else will. Someone honest. Someone paying attention. I want to pause here and ask you something. Who has seen you when no one else did? Who was the person that reminded you that you mattered even when others ignored you? Leave me a comment. I want to know the names of those quiet heroes. And with the letter framed and glowing softly in the lamplight, I realized I had a choice. I could continue chasing scraps of approval from those who would never give it, or I could take this recognition, this proof of impact, and finally let it be enough. For once, enough didn't feel like settling. It felt like freedom. The knock on my door earlier that day had been a test, a temptation to step back into the role of scaffolding. to reopen the wounds, to resume the endless performance. But the letter on my desk reminded me of the truth. I wasn't created to be convenient. I wasn't born to be invisible. I was here to make a difference. And I had already done that. I leaned back in my chair, pulled the blanket around my shoulders, and let the peace sink deeper. Outside, snow kept falling, blanketing the world in quiet white. Inside, I felt something even rarer, contentment. For the first time, I didn't need them to clap. I didn't need them to nod. I didn't need them to finally say, "We're proud of you," because I had proof in a single letter that I was already enough. Days passed, and for a while the silence felt almost sacred. My apartment became a cocoon where I could breathe without the constant hum of demands. I went to work. I came home. I read Celeste's letter whenever the doubts crept in. I thought maybe finally the storm had ended. But storms never end quietly with people who believe they are owed your silence. Another email arrived, less polished this time, more desperate. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity got the better of me. The message began with the usual phrases, "We miss you. We never meant to hurt you. Can we start over?" But buried near the end, like a splinter they couldn't hide, was the real plea. "Please ask Celeste to take down her post. Ethan is struggling to find work now. It's affecting his future." There it was, the truth. Not remorse, not accountability, just another transaction, another demand dressed in the language of family. Not "we're sorry for erasing you," not "we were wrong to exclude you, just fix this for us." Even now, with their lies unraveling, they still believed my role was to patch the cracks, to clean up their mess, to protect Ethan's shine. I read the email 3 times, each word sharper than the last, and then I closed it. No reply, no explanation, no bargaining, because some bridges are not meant to be rebuilt. The shift inside me was quiet but irreversible. For so long I had accepted their half apologies, their empty gestures, their manipulative resets. I had mistaken them for love, but this time I saw it clearly. Love is not a debt. Love does not demand silence. Love does not use you as currency to purchase someone else's future. And I was done paying. I walked to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to watch the snow drifting against the streetlights. The world outside was still covered in a blanket of white, and in that moment, I felt a strange kind of justice. They had built their entire narrative on convenience me as the scaffolding, Ethan as the star. But now the scaffolding had stepped away and the house was crumbling. And they wanted me to come back not out of love, but out of need. But need is not the same as love. I want to speak directly to you here. Have you ever had someone reach out? Not because they cared for you, but because they needed something from you. Did you give in, or did you finally draw the line? Share your story in the comments. That night I sat at my desk again, the framed letter from Celeste glowing faintly in the lamplight. Her words reminded me of something my family never could. My worth was never tied to what I could fix for them. It was tied to who I was. And who I was, serious, relentless, compassionate, was already enough. So I left the email unanswered. I let the silence be my reply. Because silence, I had learned, can be the loudest form of truth. I brewed a fresh cup of tea, stronger this time, the steam curling into the air. I wrapped the blanket tighter around my shoulders, feeling the warmth sink into me. And as I sipped slowly, I understood something with absolute clarity. They had not changed. They would not change. And it was not my job to make them. Some doors once closed should stay closed. Not out of anger, not out of bitterness, but out of respect for the person you fought so hard to become. And I wasn't going to reopen this one. The final lesson came not in fire or fury, but in quiet resolve. By then, the truth was clear. My family wasn't reaching out to heal. They were reaching out to maintain an image, to preserve the story they had written for themselves. And I no longer needed to play a role in it. For years, I believed I had to fight for my place, that if I explained myself better, tried harder, or forgave faster, maybe the door would finally stay open. But standing there in my apartment, watching the snow fall in heavy sheets outside, I understood something I had never dared to believe. I didn't need their table. I could build my own. So I moved slowly through my small space, looking at everything differently. The Christmas tree no longer looked like a symbol of rejection. It looked like a marker of survival. The unopened gifts weren't evidence of failure, they were proof of love I had given freely. Love that had value even if it wasn't received. And me, I wasn't the invisible scaffolding anymore. I was the architect of my own life. Days turned into weeks. The emails grew shorter, sharper. Eventually, they stopped altogether. The silence they left behind wasn't hollow. It was liberating. I had space to breathe, to exist, to live on my own terms. I kept working at the hospital. I sat with patients others overlooked. I listened to their stories, their regrets, their laughter. In them, I found echoes of myself, people who had given their lives to others only to be forgotten when they were no longer convenient. But unlike my family, these patients reminded me daily of something true. Presence matters. Kindness matters. And even if no one else notices, it is enough. One evening I reread Celeste's letter. You reminded her that she was still living. Those words glowed brighter than any applause I had ever craved. And I realized I didn't need to be celebrated in my family's story. I could celebrate myself in my own. The power wasn't in forcing them to see me. The power was in no longer shrinking just to fit. If you take nothing else from my story, let it be this: you are not too much. You are not invisible. And sometimes the most powerful revenge is choosing not to show up at all. You don't need to fight for a seat at someone else's table when you can build your own. So here I am telling you this not as someone broken, but as someone free. Free from the ledger of endless sacrifices. Free from the silence that used to define me. Free from the weight of waiting for love that was never real. And I want to leave you with a question. What would it look like if you stopped begging for approval and started writing your own story? Would you dare to walk away from the table that was never set for you? Share your thoughts below, because your story, like mine, deserves to be heard. And before you go, I want to invite you to keep walking with me. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, then make sure you subscribe and check out my next video. There, I'll share another story that dives even deeper into the courage it takes to choose freedom over obligation. Because this moment right here isn't the end. It's the beginning of something new. The snow finally melted weeks later, leaving behind damp sidewalks and bare trees. Life moved forward in small, steady steps. I returned to my routines at the hospital, greeting patients by name, listening to their stories, and offering what care I could. There was no spotlight, no celebration, just the quiet rhythm of work that mattered. And somehow that was enough. In my apartment, the Christmas tree eventually came down. The unopened gifts remained stacked in the closet, not as symbols of rejection anymore, but as reminders that I had loved even when it wasn't returned. They no longer felt heavy. They simply existed like pieces of a chapter I had closed with grace. Sometimes at night, I still thought about the knocks on my door, the emails, the whispers. But the sharp edges of those memories had softened. They no longer had the power to wound. Instead, they reminded me of the boundary I had finally drawn and how much peace it had given me. Celeste's letter still hung above my desk, catching the morning light. On difficult days, I would pause, read it again, and remember my worth had never been measured by the people who refused to see it. It was measured by the difference I made, the truth I lived, and the freedom I finally claimed. If you have ever felt invisible, I want you to know this. Your story doesn't end in silence. It doesn't end in rejection. It begins again the moment you stop asking permission to be enough. And as I sit here now, watching the seasons shift outside my window, I realize that freedom doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it comes in stillness. Sometimes it's as simple as closing a door and knowing you never have to open it again.